Alright, in this video we're going to be talking about sections 31.3 through 31.4 in your book, and this is talking about how plants respond to things that are not light. So in sections 31.1 and 31.2 was all about the basics of plant hormones and growth factors, and in particular phototropism and photomorphogenesis. So of course light is a really important stimulus that a plant needs to respond to. Without light, plants could not undergo photosynthesis. But there are a host of other stimuli in a plant's environment that they need to respond to besides light. And that's what we're going to talk about today. So light isn't the only stimulus a plant needs to respond to. While light is one of the most important ones, it isn't the only one. Besides light, plants also need to respond to the stimulus of gravity. And this is a big one, especially right now. Scientists and engineers for NASA are attempting to grow plants in the International Space Station. And gravity is one of the things that they have to work on. It's going to be impossible for humans to colonize outer space for any long period of time without being able to grow sustainable food sources in outer space. And one of the hurdles they're running into is that plants exhibit what's called gravitropism. So we talked about phototropism, or plants growing in response to light. Their shoots grow towards the light via oxygen. Plant roots also exhibit what's called positive gravitropism, meaning they grow downwards towards the pull of gravity. All right. This can be demonstrated by if you take a germinated seed that has roots sprouting from it and a shoot starting to form, and you plant it in dirt with the shoot upside down, facing down, and the roots facing up. The roots will still grow downwards towards the bottom of the soil container, and the shoot will still grow up towards the light, or out of the dirt. That's in part due to positive gravitropism. Now, the idea behind gravitropism is that in many cases it's mediated by these things called statoliths. And statoliths are starch-like crystals that are found, or structures found in the cytosol of plant cells. You can see them in these blue shapes right here. And that they settle on the side of the cell which is being closest to the pull of gravity, or down. And that these statoliths signal oxygen and calcium transporters, which then instigate cell growth towards that direction. So these statoliths serve as kind of like a reference point in the cell to be like, all right, this way is down, initiate growth kind of in that downward motion. And that's why this gravitropic bending occurs, is mediated by these statoliths. What's important to note, though, is that gravitropism and phototropism kind of work hand in hand. So, for example, what you've noticed maybe is if you have a plant that you grow upside down. The roots don't come out of the dirt towards the light at the bottom of the plant, even though that's where the pull of gravity is. And the reason that is because the phototropic response supersedes the gravitropic response. What that means is, as the roots exhibit positive gravitropism in that situation, that context, they're growing downward towards the light. And as the roots start to be exposed to more and more light that breaks through the soil, they are inhibited in growing that direction, grow up actually in the opposite of light. So what's important to know with these responses to stimuli is there are hierarchies. Some are supersede others, like in this situation I just talked to you about. Besides gravity, plants also respond to touch, or thigmomorphogenesis. to mechanical stimulation. So one example is you might have seen or been able to experience this plant where if you touch it, its leaves curl up and won't unfurl for about 10 minutes. And that is a positive thigmomorphic response. And how this works is that the touch stimulates potassium transporters to transport potassium out of the cells, and so the cells lose water and lose turgor pressure, and because of that they crumple up like this. It's possible that this response was evolved over time to make the plant look less appetizing to potential herbivorous predators. Another example of the thigmomorphogenic response is in the Venus flytrap. They have little hairs on the inside of their the trap part, and when they're touched by, for example, a fly, they trigger a response in the plant for it to close. And actually that response is very similar to the action potential, electric action potential in humans. It's much slower than like our nervous system action potential, but still an electrically mediated action potential. Other things that plants need to respond to in the environment, environmental stresses, so heat or cold or salinity or drought or flooding. Many plants can't survive significantly long in very hot or cold temperatures, but in very hot temperatures they might close their stomates in response, or change the fluidity of their cell membrane, the cholesterol in their cell membrane due to cold, or try to pump out salt, store extra water, or in drought conditions. But they do respond to many different environmental stresses. And you'll find hundreds and hundreds of plants that live in specific extremes of heat or cold or salinity that have very interesting evolutionary mechanisms to deal with these different environmental stressors and to maintain homeostasis. Another thing I wanted to talk about are how plants specifically respond to attack by herbivores. So herbivores eat plants, and for a plant that's not a really great thing. So herbivorous attack can severely damage or even kill a plant. And there are a myriad of different evolutionary defenses that plants can assemble or launch to defend themselves against herbivores. Really, traditionally, there are things like mechanical defenses, so like in cacti, spines, rose bushes, thorns. Trees can have really tough bark or hard seed pods to prevent herbivorous attack. So those are ones we're probably really traditionally aware of, mechanical defenses. Also, plants have chemical defenses, so they can produce toxic or distasteful chemicals that will poison or harm or leave a bad taste in the mouth of a herbivore trying to eat them. For example, here a black walnut tree, the seeds or these pods that has the black walnuts in there are poisonous. Oak trees, the acorns have tannins in them, which is a distasteful substance, and that's why one of the reasons you see that squirrels bury, especially red oak acorns, is because the tannins will fade or leach out of the acorns over time. So maybe in the middle of the summer, when winter's not approaching, that's why you'll see these acorn squirrels burying those acorns, is because they're going to wait out the tannins until they can come back and eat them. And third, there are actually behavioral defenses. So some plants release warning signals that can, like if they're being eaten, that can warn other plants and of the same species in the area that there's herbivorous predators. One example, really awesome, is the acacia tree in Africa. And it is a favorite food source of giraffes. And what is interesting is when a giraffe eats the leaves of the acacia tree, they're full of tannins. like we talked about. So those chemicals that will upset the stomachs of giraffes, make them vomit and taste bad. But what they will also do is release a aerosolized chemical, which will travel through the air up to 1,000 feet away. And when another acacia tree not being directly attacked or eaten by a giraffe senses these tannins, or these aerosolized chemicals, they will start producing in high concentrations tannins of their own, just from an aerosolized chemical messenger similar to a pheromone released by one of their species. So they don't even have to directly be attacked, they can just get that warning signal and start producing those tannins. In addition, other plants secrete different chemicals that will recruit predatory animals when they're being attacked. So, like larvae of mosquitoes. Let me back up. So, for example, some plants, if they're being attacked by caterpillars or eaten by caterpillars, will release chemicals that will attract mosquito larvae or spider mites to lay their larvae and attack the caterpillars. I think that's a really interesting different response to plant attack via herbivores. And lastly, we want to talk about plant defenses against pathogens. So plants have really 3 tiers of an immune system. One is called the PAMP, or the pathogen-associated molecular patterns triggered immunity system. And this is when if a pathogen has a specific molecular sequence. For example, the specific molecular sequence for the flagellin amino acid in bacteria that is a component of their flagella. The plant cell may be able to sense an association with that and cause a chain of cellular signals in the plant, much like the plant cell signaling we talked about before. So G proteins, kinase cascades, things like that, to result in the production of what are called phytoalexins. And these are specific chemicals that the plant can create and secrete that kills these pathogens, these bacteria. Also, the plants can go through what's called effector-triggered immunity, and one of those types is called hypersensitive response. And this is kind of a localized response to a specific pathogen. It's very specific. So these specific R proteins can detect pathogens and cause chemical defenses to be created that impairs a pathogen's cell wall, it impairs specific pathogens' metabolism or reproduction. So hypersensitive response is a localized response, and it causes the secretion of chemicals that are trying to limit the spread of a specific pathogen. Plants also have what's called a systemic acquired resistance, and this is not localized and it's not specific. It's not specific to a specific pathogen, it's just a general wide, non-specific response that's kind of like a warning signal to the whole plant. And it causes the production of non-specific defense genes against a host of different pathogens. And this cellular response is kind of transmitted in many cases by methylsalicylic acid, so a methylsalicylate. And this is a non-specific plant-wide ramping up defenses for the plant cell. So between the pathogen-associated molecular patterns triggered pathway and the hypersensitive response and systemic acquired resistance, which are both members of the effector-triggered immunity, these 3 mechanisms help plants fight off or defend against pathogens. Like we will learn here in the next unit about how the mammalian immune system fights off pathogens. Lastly, here's kind of a nice picture from your book about the hypersensitive and acquired resistant pathways of the effector-triggered response system. And an example of the localized hypersensitive response in infected tobacco leaf, kind of creating these lesions to localize and to limit the spread of that pathogen, and to launch local responses to hopefully eradicate it before it affects the rest of the plant. All right, that is it for today. If you have any questions, just give me a message and let me know. But otherwise, I will see you in class.